So, James, competition law. What can you tell me about it?
That depends. What do you want to know?
James?
Okay, only joking. Let's see. Modern competition law is fundamentally an Anglo-Saxon area of economic law developed first in the US under the provisions of the Sherman Act. But you can see examples of laws prohibiting restraints on trade from Roman times onwards through the Renaissance and later during the Industrial Revolution.
Good. Let's concentrate on modern competition law as developed in the US.
Okay, so in the US in the mid to late 1800s, there were a number of large monopolies organized by way of trusts, which wielded significant economic power. Probably the best known of these large trusts was Standard Oil, under the control of John D. Rockefeller.
And what was the problem with that?
Well, it led to an inefficient allocation of resources and excessive profits for the monopolists, which was bad for the general US economy.
And so what happened?
At first, some states tried to curb the power of these monopolies by adopting laws restricting the power of the trusts, and consequently, these laws became known as antitrust laws. However, these laws just had the effect of promoting forum shopping, whereby the business affected established their headquarters in another US state that had no antitrust laws in place.
And so then what happened?
It became necessary to intervene and harmonize the law at federal level, and eventually the US Sherman Act was adopted in 1892, prohibiting monopolization and conspiracies between companies aimed at distorting competition. A couple of decades later, Standard Oil was broken up into a number of different companies, and the competition in that particular industry was restored, benefiting everyone financially, even John D. Rockefeller.
Is the Sherman Act the only piece of US competition legislation on the statute books?
No, later statutes were also adopted, such as the Clayton Act in 1914, listing practices that might be considered anti-competitive, something that the Sherman Act had failed to do.
Okay, good, James. Now, what can you tell me about competition law in the European Union?
Well, in 1957, the EEC Treaty was adopted. One of the aims of the EEC Treaty was the creation of an internal market between its member states. However, the European authorities were afraid that the internal market might lead to the creation of large European-type monopolies, as had occurred in the US.
So what did they do?
They included an updated version of the Sherman Act prohibitions in the Treaty of Rome, whereby the abuse of dominance was prohibited rather than dominance itself.
Very good, James. Okay, let's take a break as I have to make a call.
Sure, no problem. Why don't I step outside to give you some privacy?
Would you? Thanks, James.